Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I'm going to be talking about one artist for your tabletop role-playing game and the advantages that brings to your game. All right, so it's my birthday today, which is really nice. And so my wife gifted me with a very generous amount of mad money that I could buy any tabletop role-playing games I wanted with, and I was just very, very excited about this. And it's also really nice because this is it's just kind of mad money. I can get whatever I want, which is really nice. So one of the things I did was I allowed myself to get a game that I knew nothing about. Like, it was just like there, and I was like, oh, I would really like to try this, right? So the game is Spire by Grant Howitt, and I believe it's Christopher Taylor, I think, is the other person. And all of the art in the entire tabletop role-playing game of Spire is done by Adrian Stone. One person, right? So, so this entire game has one art style, right? And the game is very, very unusual. So Spire is the story of a gigantic city that has levels, almost like you would see in a Judge Dredd, megalopolis, so basically this city is one gigantic building that has levels, and all these different things happen on the levels. So it's a little bit fantasy, it's a little bit sci-fi. It's a really unique story that is specific to this one game. So this is one game, one world, really like nothing else. It's a unique intellectual property, very, very unique game, right? So, and it's gorgeous. It's as far as the layout and the art, it is really stylized. The person, Adrian Stone, has kind of a crisp style, but it is also a little bit blocky. It's hard to describe, but it's very, very high quality and very stylized, right? But one of the things as I went through this game that I was just absolutely blown away with is the cohesiveness of the visual palette, right? So there's a palette of colors that are being chosen. There is one style, and then the world itself, when you're looking at the art, which is showing you, hey, this is this world, this is what the buildings look like, this is what the this is what your player characters' options are as far as race or as far as class, and that's all in one unique style, right? And it's gorgeous, and it's compelling, and it moves you along in the story in a way that having multiple artists really doesn't. And actually, I never really thought, oh, here's a new artist style that's taking me out, and I'm having to process, why is this style different than that style, right? But when it's all one cohesive style, it's so, it just moves you along in the story so much more smoothly that you have to acknowledge it once you've seen it, right? So I was really fascinated by how Spire approached the art within the tabletop role-playing game book. It's all done by one person, and I thought, wow, this is a really great way to do this because it has benefits that using multiple artists doesn't have, right? A good example of this, I never really thought about this, but is Cypher, right? Like, I love Monty Cook Games, all their stuff. Like, I really like, I am a huge fan of Cypher. But it's multiple artists, right? And basically, that's another thing, is all this art, appears to be hand-drawn, right? Now, this person could be using digital tools, but this doesn't look like a photoshopped picture. And some of the art that you find in Monty Cook's games, you can just see the kind of a Photoshop element there. It seems very crisp. It seems very, like there was a Photoshop tool involved in the creation of this art, where you just don't see that in Spire. Spire is just so unique, and the visual style is so cohesive, it really makes you stop and think about the other games that you've seen, right? So there's a really, really distinct benefit. Now, one of the things I'm curious of is, how did they get there, right? So I'm going to do a little bit of speculation here, right? So Spire's brand new, just came out, right? And you look at this thing, it's about 220 pages long, and it has dozens of pieces of art, absolutely dozens, like probably up near 50 pieces of art. You're seeing a good solid full-page spread every 3 or 4 pages, 5 at max, right? And so it's a very generous amount of art within a tabletop role-playing game. They didn't skimp, right? So I'm like, well, how did they accomplish this, right? So one, they would have to contract this person's time. And that's another way. It's another thing that's very clear is this did not come out of Adrian Stone's stock work. Like, this had to be created custom for the game because it matches so clearly with the world that's been created. This didn't just, they weren't pulling something that was created for another reason and using it for this game, which you see a lot of that in tabletop role-playing games. And I think a lot of times that works fine, but it really catches you when you see it, when you're like, oh, when you see a game that's just done in a different way, you're like, wow, this is really different. They're approaching this in a completely different way, right? And so I think what happened is with Adrian Stone, Grant Howitt and Christopher Taylor went to Adrian Stone and said, hey, we need this, we need this work. They had to have commissioned him. They had to have used a significant amount of his time, like weeks or months, to do this work. I don't think there's any possibility that this work could have been done in a matter of days. It would have taken weeks or months, right? And then the other thing is that is once Adrian Stone got working on this, right, how much did they pay? Right? I'm really, really curious about that. So when I look at it, one, I actually know some professional artists. I have some people I know who do work professionally. And one, it's incredibly difficult to make your living as an artist. It's just very difficult. And the reason why is it's fun to do, so there's a high supply, and the demand is relatively low compared to the supply, right? So people don't generally pay a lot for art. For good art, they're willing to pay more, but it's hard to commission artists, right? And so with all that said, my speculation is that there's at least $5,000 worth of work here, and there's perhaps $50,000 worth of work. So my speculation on how much this costs, when I look at it, I'm guessing there's between $5,000 and $50,000 worth of work here. And and that is a huge sum of money to put out for a tabletop role-playing game. And and one of the things that's interesting is just thinking about the economics of tabletop role-playing games. So one, I think the market for Spire is very small, right? And here's why I say that. So one, this is not a pure fantasy game. It's involved in sci-fi. Whenever you rub sci-fi on a tabletop role-playing game, you immediately decrease the amount of people that are going to play it. Like the biggest games on the market are fantasy, not sci-fi. So whenever you attach science fiction to your tabletop role-playing game, you actually reduce the size of your market. You don't increase it, right? So in addition to that, it's not on a main, this is not a D20 product. Like, this is not 5e compatible. This, to my knowledge, is not Fate connected. It's not Powered by the Apocalypse connected. It's its own independent rule set. Same thing. You absolutely compress the amount of people that are going to be willing to pay for this and purchase this game, right? And so it's a really large expenditure for a game that very clearly has a small market, in my opinion, right? So it's really, you look at this and you're like, how did they get this done, right? And it's really fascinating. So, so walking away from all of this, the thing I would say is, if you can do this, this is a wonderful, wonderful way to go. I think this is an awesome way to build a tabletop role-playing game, is to actually say, hey, here's the product, and we're going to use one artist for this project. So I think this is very difficult to do. You have to have a lump sum of money. You have to commission one artist. You have to take weeks or months of their time. You have to be patient. But I will tell you right now, the one artist approach carries you through that story in such a, the visual cohesiveness of a tabletop role-playing game created with one artist is a beautiful thing to behold. And I highly recommend Spire. I haven't completed reading Spire yet, right? I've gone through, I've taken a look at the whole thing from an art perspective, right? Because I was just fascinated by this when I saw it. So I can't say, oh, you should get Spire because it's a great game, because I haven't finished it yet. But I absolutely think, if you are a TRPG art enthusiast, you need to see Spire just to see what they're doing here, because this is really, really unique what they're accomplishing. So take a look, and also, if you're a tabletop role-playing game designer out there, and you could do this, you can create all the art for your game with one artist, you should strongly consider it, because the benefits are significant. Significant. Take care.